By a show of hands, tell me if you've ever been in a meeting and you've seen something unfair happen. Okay. A few of you. Okay. Another show of hands. Tell me if you've ever been in a meeting and something unfair happened to you. Okay. Fewer, but still some. Those of you who did not raise your hand, don't worry. Your time will come. Okay. Probably sooner than you think. I've actually experienced that quite a bit, and that kind of motivated my choice of topics for today. What I'm going to talk to you about is your rights as they're defined in Robert's Rules of Order. Okay? The skills, a few skills that you need to enforce those rights under Robert's Rules of Order. Then I'm going to talk about some tactics that I have seen used in meetings that would infringe upon those rights. And then finally we'll talk about your defense, how you defend against those tactics. So I'll provide you a list of things that I've noticed happen occasionally in meetings, and then provide you ways of responding to those so that you can defend your rights. The first one is an event that happened to me a couple of years ago in a meeting, and I thought it was unfair. And I went and I researched the rules, and I found out that, and the way I see it, some rules were violated, and I didn't quite know how to handle it. And I'm going to talk about it in this discussion right here. This is a 2-minute clip, and it captures the essence of what I'm talking about today. I'm going to set this up for you. An organization that I'm a member of has an annual convention. In this annual convention, the chairman of that organization, right here, this is the chairman of the organization. His name is Mr. Graham. He did some things that the membership didn't really like. There are 2 major factions participating in this big meeting. And it was divided about half and half to each faction. One faction I'll call the establishment faction. They were running the meeting. And then there was the grassroots faction that comprised about half of the assembly there. Okay, the backstory to this is the membership introduced a resolution to censure the chairman, to censure this gentleman right here. The chairman hired, as he was entitled to do under our bylaws, he hired a presider, somebody to preside over the meeting in his place during this time of the meeting, because as you can imagine, that could be kind of controversial. Okay, so he hired a presider to preside, and he said, "So this is the chairman of the meeting." Okay. And watch how he responds to the resolution of censure that was introduced. And listen carefully to what he said.
Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Parliamentarian, I make a motion that the full resolution that qualified be heard by the body, the censure against Robert Graham.
I second.
Okay, listen to me carefully. With regard to this matter, the chair rules as follows. The motion did receive the proper number of required signatures to be brought from the floor. However, Chairman Graham is a member of this body. Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised, states the following. Punishments that a society can impose generally fall under the headings of censure, fine, suspension, or expulsion. Since this resolution seeks to censor Chairman Graham, the procedures for disciplinary procedures would apply. In Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised, it states on page 256 that a member or officer has the right that allegations against his good name shall not be made except by charges brought on reasonable ground. If thus accused, he has the right to due process, that is, to be informed of the charge, given time to prepare his defense, to appear and defend himself, and to be fairly treated. The proper method of censoring an officer would be to initiate a committee to investigate the veracity of the situation, and if the committee found merit to prefer charges against the officer, prefer those charges. And if charges were preferred, the officer would then have sufficient time to prepare a defense, and then a trial would be held. All of these are necessary steps according to the parliamentary authority, and it's designed to protect the rights of the individual member which cannot be suspended even by a unanimous vote. Based on this information, the chair rules this motion out of order because the action violates the rights of an individual member to due process and may subject to the body to charges of libel.
Okay. So did everybody understand what happened there? He said we couldn't censure the chairman unless we went through official disciplinary proceedings. Now I need a volunteer who has a copy of Robert's Rules of Order with them. Anybody have a copy of this? The full one? If you could turn to page 643, please. That's the first chapter on disciplinary procedures that I looked up when I got home, right after I got home after this meeting. Turned to disciplinary procedures, looked at the footnote, and I nearly fell off my chair. Somebody want to read that to me?
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Footnote, Disciplinary Procedures, page 643. It is also possible to adopt a motion of censure without formal disciplinary procedures.
Thank you very much. Ooh, yeah. It is also possible to adopt a motion of censure without disciplinary procedures. Well, what did we just hear there? It seemed like a conflict to me, right? And when I saw that, I realized, oh my goodness, I think I got fooled. I think there were about 1,000 people in this room, divided about half and half. That means 500 political activists, state committeemen in this particular party, didn't know the basic rule and got fooled by that ruling. Now, I'll tell you further, I actually submitted a complaint, an ethics complaint, with the National Association of Parliamentarians because it was so blatantly wrong. And the gentleman was exonerated. What he did there was not illegal. And we'll talk about why that is a little bit later on in this presentation. But you're going to see why it's so important for you to know what your rights are. If you don't know what they are, you don't have them. And even if you do know what they are, you don't have them unless you can enforce them. And I'm going to talk about both of those things today. A little bit of background first, just the essence of what we need for the rest of this presentation. You're going to see this abbreviation a lot, RONR. That simply stands for Rules of Order Newly Revised, and that's how we abbreviate Robert's Rules of Order. It's the official way it's abbreviated. Also, whenever you're citing this document, it's traditional to go to the page and line numbers, and this is the official way that it is actually referred to in citations. You'll see these everywhere. In this presentation, I'm using a shortcut because I just needed to save space. But the 11th edition is the current edition. You list the page number and then the lines number. That's LL for line number. Okay, that's point number one that you need to know. Point number two, bylaws trump Robert's rules. Okay, whatever is in the bylaws or charter of your organization takes precedence over Robert's rules. Robert's only applies to the things that aren't covered in your bylaws. So if you quote Robert's rules, make sure that your bylaw doesn't have something in there that overrules what Roberts says. Secondly, Roberts only applies if it is actually invoked by your bylaws. Okay? If Robert's rules isn't invoked in your bylaws or your charter or your constitution, none of this applies. If it is, that's referred to as your parliamentary authority. You'll see those words used occasionally. Your parliamentary authority. All right, this presentation is not comprehensive. I took what I saw were the simplest and most common things that happen in meetings, but there's an entire another layer of complexity on top of this that I'm not going to talk about, and that involves things that happen regarding the agenda and how an agenda can be manipulated to infringe upon your rights as a member. Okay. So we're not going to talk about those. That'll be a topic for another day. Okay, another thing. Parliamentarians cannot make rulings. If you are in a meeting and the chair says, well, the parliamentarian has ruled that out of order, can't happen. Okay, a parliamentarian only advises the chair of the meeting. The chair can take the advice or disregard it. It's the chair's decision. The chair is presumably a member of the group. And that's the person who's given the responsibility to make decisions of order. Okay. Silly one here, aye and no are the correct responses when you're voting. There's no such thing as nay in Parliament, in Robert's Rules. The House of Representatives does it, but I don't know of any other organizations that do. Okay, so it's aye and no. And then finally, regarding background information, I want to emphasize that formality depends on the situation. I'm going to be telling you a number of rules that might seem picayune, or people who aren't familiar with them might seem kind of ridiculous or unnecessary to be so precise. And I want to emphasize that Robert's Rules allows small groups, anyway, to be much less formal than what you're going to see today. And if nobody objects to that, it's perfectly okay. There's this thing called informal consideration in Robert's Rules, which basically says anybody can talk to anybody. You don't have to go through the chair. You don't have to follow a lot of these procedures. And if nobody feels like their rights are being violated, it's okay. Same thing with unanimous consent. The group can make decisions, and if nobody objects to them, there's no need to go through a motion, a second, a discussion, debate, vote. If everybody agrees on something, it can be done much more quickly using unanimous consent. Does anybody have any objection to us adjourning? Hearing no objections, we are adjourned. That sort of thing can save a lot of time. So let's actually now get into the actual rights of members. So as I see it, there are two major categories of rights. There are, first of all, and most importantly, the rights of the majority. And this is a quote right out of the book. Ultimately, it is the majority, and I bolded that, taking part in the assembly, who decide the general will. Majority, that means that no one individual, not the chair, not the parliamentarian, nobody gets to decide what the organization does. Only the majority does. Okay? The rights of the minority can be infringed upon if 2/3 or more vote to do so. But that's usually a very difficult threshold to reach. So it's the majority that decide what the organization wants to do. Now for individuals, an individual member has these rights: to attend meetings, to make motions, to speak in debate, and to vote. Okay, and no member can be deprived of these basic rights of membership. That's pretty uncontroversial, except for this one here, to make motions. You may find, as I have, that some organizations do not necessarily appreciate members introducing business that hasn't been vetted through the leadership first. So you'll find yourself sometimes trying to make motions and being shut down because the chair doesn't necessarily want to hear those motions. Okay, and we'll see some examples of this. And of course, rules cannot be suspended to abridge these rights. All right. So a majority decides. Individuals do have rights, including the right to make motion, and they cannot be people cannot be deprived of that right, according to Robert's Rules of Order. All right. So let's talk about some of the skills now. Those are the rights that you have that cannot be infringed. But of course, as we saw before, you don't necessarily have those rights unless you can enforce them. Here's how to enforce them. I'm going to show you 4 tools that you can use to enforce those rights, or at least to attempt to enforce those rights. Number 1 of the 4 is getting recognized. Before you can speak, you need to be recognized by the chairman of the organization. Okay? And to do that, in a big meeting, you'd stand up, go to the microphone, and call out the name, Mr. Chairman or Mr. President or whatever. In a smaller group, it's much less formal than that. You simply say the name or say Mr. Chairman, and he may nod to you and give you the floor. Okay? So that's a pretty simple thing, but it's often overlooked. You don't just want to shout out motions and things like that without being recognized first, because then you're going to have a little bit less, how shall we say it, gravitas, during the meeting. So get recognized first, then recognize that the chair has an obligation to recognize you if you are entitled to the floor. You, as a member of the organization, cannot legitimately be ignored in most cases. There are some exceptions to this, but I think they're pretty obvious. If you are constantly interrupting and being dilatory, trying to slow the meeting down with a bunch of irrelevant motions and points of order and things like that, then the chair actually can ignore you legitimately. During debate, the chair will alternate between pro and con on a given resolution or motion. Okay, so you can't speak out of turn, things like that. But in general, you cannot be ignored during a meeting. Okay, that was skill number 1. Skill number 2, making motions. Okay, there's going to be more discussion this morning on how to make motions. They're going to go into a lot more depth than I can here, but I just wanted to sort of set up the scope for this presentation. I'm talking about main motions. Okay, that is what you typically think of as a motion, where you introduce business to the assembly. Okay, there are a large number of secondary motions. I'm not really talking about those right now. Just the introduction of main motions. There are some conditions to that, and that'll be discussed more a little bit later today. When are main motions allowed? This is one of the things that I'm not going to talk about a lot today, but know that if there is an agenda, a binding agenda, one that has been adopted by the group, there are only 2 specific times when you can introduce main motions. During new business, when the chairman calls for it, or after an officer or a committee report, if there's a recommendation made in that report. So be aware of those 2 times when you're actually allowed to introduce new business to the organization. If there isn't an adopted agenda, no binding order of business, Robert's Rule says you can introduce any legitimate matter at any time, as long as no other business, no other motion is on the floor at that time. So this is often used against members who want to introduce new business. They'll be out of order because it's not the right time of the meeting. Well, if you know when the right time of the meeting is, you can avoid that happening to you. Then the form of a main motion is simply, I move. You don't say, so moved, or any other variation like that. Let me also mention that when you make a main motion, it generally needs to be seconded, and somebody else needs to do that. You can't do that yourself. Here's an example of a chair who understands that fact.
Next item, resolution determining trustee position vacant.
I guess I'll make that motion.
Okay, motion made by trustee Ramirez-Lewinsky.
For discussion.
We're waiting for a second. Still waiting for a second.
You ought to know you're not going to get one.
It dies.
You already made your speech, and so we don't want to hear it again, to be real honest with you.
So
You're not going to get a second.
Dies for lack of a second. It dies for...
I understand, Trustee Segwalt.
Well, how long are you going to wait? I'm just asking a question. How long are you going to wait?
Yeah, well, I'm still waiting for a second. Still waiting for a second.
Attorney Rhodes, is there any time limit on how long you have to wait before a motion dies for lack of a second? Or are we going to sit here till midnight?
There's no time limit. The board has the right to make a motion as it does in all other instances.
Okay. Is there any procedure that we can do to end this?
Next skill, the point of order. Don't be afraid to do this. You've seen this done. If you know the rule officially, how it's declared in Robert's Rules, you'll be more confident in being able to do it. When a member thinks that the rules are being violated, he can make a point of order, which calls upon the chair for a ruling and hopefully an enforcement of the rules. All right? If you see a rule being broken, make a point of order. You don't need to wait for somebody to stop talking. You can interrupt. And you don't need a second. Just shout it out. Interrupting. Point of order. At that point, hopefully the chair will acknowledge you and let you state your point, at which point you explain what rule has been violated, and then presumably, if the chair agrees with you, your point will be acted upon. Okay. This is something that is very fast and efficient to do. It's convenient, and it can be abused. You don't want to be shooting points of order left and right for every little thing, because it will become counterproductive after a while. But when you do see a rule being abused, feel free. Now, this calls for the chair to make a ruling. Suppose the chair doesn't rule correctly. Suppose the chair says your point is not well taken and ignores your complaint about the rule. If you believe your rule is correct and you were incorrectly shut down by this, the next skill is the one that you need to use, and that is the appeal. Okay. And this is the big one, the most important one, and the one that I have found in most organizations people are totally unaware of. But it is absolutely essential to know this. Quote, by one member making or taking the appeal and another seconding it, the question is taken from the chair. The chair is taken out of it, has no more authority to decide that matter, and the decision is vested in the assembly for final decision. Okay. This is something that I see happen, or used to see happen a lot before I learned about it. The chair would make a ruling if something is out of order. People would get all angry. They'd complain. They'd do all kinds of things, file ethics complaints, all kinds of stuff like that, to no effect. Okay. To no effect because members have no right to criticize the ruling of a chair unless they appeal from his decision. You don't appeal, the decision stands. This is the one thing that prevents a chairman from becoming the ultimate dictator of an organization. And it reflects the fact that the organization is the assembly, right? It's the assembly. That's the organization, no one individual. You don't need to be recognized to make an appeal. And the way you do it is you simply state, quote, I appeal from the decision of the chair. Somebody else needs to second that. Once that statement is made and seconded, okay, the chairman is no longer the person who makes that decision. The chairman, if he's acting correctly, will state the decision of the chair is appealed from. He'll explain his reasoning for his decision and then put it up to the assembly by putting the question, shall the decision of the chair be sustained? Okay, there may be debate, there will be a vote, and the assembly can vote to overrule whatever that decision was. Okay, despite what the chair said. Okay, this caused a lot of problems. When I first learned how to do this back in 2016 in my district meetings in a political organization that I was involved with, the chair didn't even understand how this was possible. Nobody did. But I said, no, here's the rule, chapter and verse, page number, line number. And it took some doing to educate people about it. But once that happened, we now have a tool that we can use to assert the will of the majority. This is the way that the will of the majority is enforced. Okay, so that was the fourth of the four skills. Getting recognized, making a motion, raising a point of order, and raising an appeal. With those four things, you can get a lot done. And what I have done is I have actually collected a list of things that have happened to me in meetings, and I've given some suggestions for how to deal with them. Here is that list. This is a list of 15 tactics that I've experienced. Well, actually, I haven't experienced these last two. We'll get to those later. But these 13 I've experienced in meetings. These are tactics that, if they are used indiscriminately by a chair, can infringe upon your rights as a member of the organization. Okay? I list the tactic. I list the rule that tactic violates. I list how you respond to that tactic. And if Robert's Rules of Order provides a procedure for you to follow in doing so, I've listed it here. And let's see. Okay, I'm doing okay on time. So I'm going to start with the first one and go through these. And once you see the format and how this works, you'll be able to extrapolate this list to any situation you might run into. Okay? For example, the chair engages in debate. Okay. A chairman running a meeting has been elected to run meetings. Now, as a member of the organization, the chair can vote and have opinions about things. But when you're running a meeting, you're supposed to be neutral, according to Robert's Rules of Order. Right? The chair, being chairman, precludes exercising these rights while presiding. Okay? Normally, a chair should have nothing to say on the merits of pending questions. So chairs cannot debate. If you see it happen, what do? Point of order, Mr. Chairman. The chairman will ask you what your point is. You will indicate you are engaging in debate, not allowed. And if the chair is going to be responsive to the rules, the chair will say your point is well taken, and then refrain thereafter from engaging in debate. Now, these are sort of utopian, right? In reality, when you do this, the response might not be so polite. You know, be aware of that. And be ready to debate, and be ready to cite page and line numbers in Robert's Rules of Order. It'll be hard for a chair to overcome that. Okay, if you know your rules. Okay, next one. This one I experience every month in my district meetings. Chair fails to call for new business. After unfinished business and general orders have been disposed of, the chair asks, is there any new business? Or if there was some business already that took place, the chair would ask, is there any further new business? Okay? And then members can exercise their fundamental right, as listed in Robert's Rules, of introducing new items of business. Okay? One way to deal with that is a point of order. Okay, point of order, Mr. Chair, I believe you failed to call for further new business. Your point is well taken. Is there further new business? Okay, at least that's the way it's supposed to happen. This is one of those things that gets complicated by the adoption of an agenda, an official order of business that's binding or not. But if there is no official binding order of business, if they haven't learned how to use that yet, this is a very effective way to get your new business introduced. Parliamentarian makes rulings. Okay, remember, parliamentarians are not allowed to make rulings. Only the chair can do that. But if the chair says the parliamentarian rules this out of order or whatever, again, point of order. Parliamentarians cannot make rulings, cite Robert's Rules, and there's no way they can get around that. Okay, the chair can then make the same ruling if he or she so wants to, but then, being that it's the chair, you can appeal that ruling, right? And then let the body decide whether the motion is out of order. Chair rules your motion out of order. Now, this is a general thing. There are many, many rules that your motion might violate, and the chair can rule it out of order. In general, regardless of what the reason is, you respond with an appeal, and during that appeal, you get a chance to speak first, and during that time, you explain the reason for your appeal. And if you can demonstrate that you know the rules, you can be very effective at doing that. Okay, so the chair may say your motion is out of order because I appeal from the decision of the chair. Chair's decision is appealed from. Shall the decision of the chair be sustained? This is, in general, what happens. After that, there is debate and the vote. Okay. Now, what I've done in the next 5 slides is given sort of example, typical reasons why your motion might be ruled out of order. Okay, and how to deal with those. So, if the chair rules your motion out of order because no disciplinary proceedings have been held, we already know how to deal with that one. Right? I have that page number memorized now. Page 643. Okay? So, if it's out of order because disciplinary proceedings have not been conducted, it's easy. I appeal from the decision of the chair. Look at page 643. Again, it's not going to necessarily be a very polite meeting or a quiet meeting when you do something like this, but that's what the rules say. Your motion is ruled out of order because it is dilatory. Dilatory is one of those terms of art in Robert's Rules that indicates you're trying to waste time. And people actually do this. And when they do, the chair actually has a duty to prevent members from misusing legitimate forms of motions. You can make motion after motion after motion that's ridiculous and has no merit Okay? And so the chair is then obligated to rule you out of order and can even ignore you completely and not respond when you're trying to get the floor. They have the right to do that. What's actually not fair, though, is when this is used and your motion is not dilatory. Okay? If your motion really isn't dilatory and you can prove it by explaining the reasons for it, okay, then you would appeal, as we discussed in the previous slide. And in the ensuing debate, explain why your motion is not dilatory. What I think might be effective is get the assembly involved. Say, how many people here think this is an important issue that we really need to discuss? You know, when a large proportion of the assembly raises their hand, it's very difficult for the chair to say, nope, you're just trying to waste time. Okay, another case, improper. This is interesting. There are two levels of, I guess you would say, impropriety here. If your motion conflicts with the corporate charter, constitution, or bylaws, it is out of order. And even if it's adopted, it's null and void. That is, if it conflicts with the bylaws of your organization. That actually makes sense, right? And so if it does conflict, you are indeed out of order. But here's a little bit less of an extreme case. Suppose your motion is outside the scope of the organization's, object, right? Suppose you make a motion that, you all go to the top of the building and jump off, okay? It probably doesn't conflict with your bylaws because bylaws probably don't address that, but it certainly would be outside the scope of your bylaws. Can you pass a motion like that legitimately? According to this, you can, right? According to this, you can. If it's outside the scope of the organization's object, it's out of order unless it is introduced by a 2/3 vote. If 2/3 of the members of the assembly agree you can indeed vote on that, then you can, even if it is completely outside the scope of the organization. Okay, and you enforce that by means of an appeal. Illegal. I like this one. Okay, your motion is out of order because it is against the law. Well, if you read carefully, Robert's Rules doesn't say that it can't be against the law. What it says is it can't violate procedural rules prescribed by national, state, or local laws. Right? Not substantive law, but procedural rules. And at least in a political organization, procedural rules are things like the election of officers, when that needs to take place, the use of proxies during meetings for voting, things of that nature, the procedure. But actually, substance, it doesn't say anything about that. And I like to think of laws that need to be ignored, nullified, or broken. The Fugitive Slave Act, for example. If you're a member of an organization that didn't want to abide by an abomination like that, there's no reason why you can't pass a motion or a resolution against it. Or how about the Declaration of Independence, even? That was illegal at the time. That was treason against Great Britain. It was treason, but they passed it, right? And I'm glad they did. Okay. Your motion is out of order because it may subject our organization to a lawsuit. There is nothing in Robert's Rules of Order that says it's out of order if there's a risk of a lawsuit. Right? Nothing in there. If the chair disagrees, raise what's called a parliamentary inquiry and say, okay, where is it? Mr. Chairman, what rule in Robert's Rules says we can't accept a lawsuit if we want to? So you appeal the decision of the chair. Note that the majority, not the chair, rules, right? And if the majority decides that they're willing to accept such a risk, it is perfectly within their rights to do so. Okay, I've been talking about the appeal and how you use that to overcome rulings that aren't fair. Suppose the chairman prohibits an appeal. Okay, there is actually a rule in Roberts which states when the chair rules on a question about which there cannot possibly be two reasonable opinions, an appeal would be dilatory and is not allowed. So again, if you're doing appeals for no reason other than to waste time, they are indeed out of order. But suppose it's not. I have seen 3 times in my personal experience in the recent past a chair invoke this rule here to an appeal which was totally not dilatory. Absolutely not dilatory. When close to half, at least approximately half the assembly wanted to debate that motion. Okay? So when a chair does that, what do? You appeal. There is no authority to say, you cannot appeal this decision. You can still appeal the decision, even if he says you can't. So, this motion is out of order, and because there cannot possibly be 2 reasonable opinions, blah, 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 there can be no appeal from this decision. What do you say? I appeal from the decision of the chair. And that's the time when I yell it out loudly when I see this being abused. All right? It'll get a lot of seconds. Okay? The chairman will rule your appeal out of order. Okay? And then your job, of course, is to, during the debate, explain why it's not out of order. Again, I like to get the assembly involved in this decision. Say, folks here, by show of hands, who thinks that that I'm trying to waste time here? Who thinks we don't need to discuss this? And get the assembly involved because they are the organization. Okay, so this happened to me 3 times. The first 2 times it worked because I didn't know the rules. Last time, just this past January, it didn't work. You need to know the rules to be able to enforce them. Remember that first clip we saw at the beginning of this meeting where the chair ruled that disciplinary procedures weren't followed? Okay. Incorrectly? Let's take a look at that clip again. I want to show you a little bit more from that same clip.
Based on this information, the chair rules this motion out of order because the action violates the rights of an individual member to due process and may subject to the body to charges of libel. Since there cannot possibly be 2 interpretations of this ruling because it's straight out of the parliamentary authority, there can be no appeal to this decision.
Made half the crowd very happy, made the other half of the crowd very, very angry. Just a parenthetical note. I think that there probably wasn't enough, the majority was probably on the side of the chairman. Not by much, but I think he had the majority. Had this chairman allowed it to go to a vote, it would have been defeated, I think, I'm just estimating now, and nobody would have had any complaints. But instead, you had a group shut down, not being allowed to have their say, and that made them very, very angry. Ever since this meeting, this particular group has been in chaos because of this fight between these 2 groups. And it's because this particular chairman, in my opinion, shut down the debate and the vote. Another tactic. A chair calls a voice vote incorrectly. So when you vote yay or no, right, the chairman has to listen carefully as to which gets the majority and then call that. Well, they have a temptation, I think, sometimes to be a little bit biased, and they might call it incorrectly. Whether intentionally or not, you might doubt whether it was called correctly. There's a special motion that you can do. It's called division. You can just jump up and shout, division. And if even one member of the group calls division, just one, it must happen. And there must be a rising vote, counted vote, whatever, to clarify exactly who is in the majority. Okay? That's easy to do, and it only takes one member. You don't need to get a second or anything on it. Okay? So the ayes or the noes have it. Division. A division is called for, and then some other voting method will take place that allows for a more accurate count. Imagine reading a teleprompter which announces the result of the vote before the vote is even taken.
Mr. Chairman, I move adoption of the rules of the Republican Party. The resolution. These rules will provide a strong governing framework for our convention and for our party. Thank you. The question is on the adoption of the resolution. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye! All those opposed, no.
Now, the video doesn't show that, and the TV coverage at the time also did not show it, but a friend of mine was there, and he said there was pandemonium and screaming and yelling for 20 minutes after this happened, because what they were voting on was a very important rule regarding how the party was going to be run. And 20 minutes. The people shouting USA at the end, that's a traditional thing they do, and they want to quiet down the people who are objecting to the ruling. So they wanted to drown it out. Another tactic, the chair abuses unanimous consent, right? Unanimous consent is a valid thing. Is there any objection to X? Hearing none, X is adopted, okay? If that is rushed through, that's not good. What you need to be able to do is shout out, I object. Do it quickly and loudly so that there can be no doubt that you objected. In a big room, a big hall like that, as Vivian pointed out correctly, be at a microphone. If you can't get to a microphone quickly enough, that's a bad thing. What I do in these meetings, I've learned, is I sit right next to the microphone in case I need to do this. In January, I was at a meeting, and it was rough. It was rough, but I did it many times in many different contexts, many appeals, points of order. They needed to be done, but I had to stay right next to the microphone. I was at another meeting, another convention, the year before that, and I raised I guess it was a parliamentary inquiry, and the microphone was off. And I was ready to get very, very angry, and I ran in front of the dais there, and I was waving my arms up and down, point of order, or whatever it was, and I was acknowledged. And they said, wait a minute, we'll get that microphone turned on for you, and they did. So some people handle it correctly. Others, I can't be too confident. The chair makes up rules. My suggestion, a parliamentary inquiry, please. The member will state the inquiry. Which rule in our bylaws, standing rules, or parliamentary authority requires that, whatever? Call the chair on it and let the chair tell you if there is a rule. If there isn't, it will be hard to justify that particular rule that's being made up. Okay, so all of those I've experienced. These last two, I have not, thankfully. But I was ready to. This past 1 year ago in January, we had an extremely controversial situation at the state party convention, and it was a very controversial thing. One of the entire districts was going to be disenfranchised and not allowed to vote. So I had met with lawyers. We were planning our parliamentary strategy to counter that. And we thought, well, one thing that could happen is our point of order or our appeal would be ignored. How were we going to handle that? Robert's Rules of Order, and I have to say, they've thought of everything. Over 100 years, 140 years of wisdom is in this book. They really and truly captured it, okay? They've thought of that. What happens if you're ignored? There's a rule in there. If the chair ignores a point of order, and there's another rule there's another one of these in parallel called an appeal, ignores a point of order or an appeal that is not dilatory, the member can repeat the point of order a second and third time, and if the chair still ignores it, the member standing in his place can immediately put the point of order to a vote without debate. The question may be put as, is the point of order that, whatever, well taken? So, the chairman is droning on and on with some irrelevant stuff. You raise your hand, point of order, the chair's time has expired. You're ignored, you do it again. You do it again. And if you're still ignored, in your place to the assembly. Is the point of order that whatever? Well taken. All in favor, say aye. Now, in a small meeting, I can easily see how this could be done. It's not going to be a nice meeting. It's not going to be a polite meeting. There are going to be tempers flaring, but I can see standing up and doing this in a small meeting. In a large hall, the meeting that I'm referring to, for example, was in a very large hall of about 1,000 delegates. We thought, well, we won't be heard. The solution? We brought 2 bullhorns in case we needed to invoke this rule. 2 bullhorns to actually do the points of order or the appeals and take the vote ourselves. I've seen people ejected from meetings for doing much, much less than this. Okay, it's happened at other conventions. People, just mild things being yelled out, got them ejected from a meeting. This is much worse than that. So how do you prevent yourself from getting ejected? Again, I haven't experienced this yet, but I can tell you that my suggestion would be, if there are police or the sheriff there, and there usually are at these big meetings, go up to the person in charge and say, you know, there's some controversial things here. We're following procedure. This is what Robert's Rule says we are allowed to do. So if you see me with a bullhorn yelling, point of order, don't kick me out. Okay? Hopefully they'll listen and understand and not kick you out when you do that. But keep in mind, they're going to be yelled at by the chairman of the meeting saying, kick him out, kick him out. So I don't know what will happen, but I'm looking forward to it someday. Same exact rule applies for appeals in addition to points of order. The only difference is you must be seconded every time when you're doing appeals, okay, as opposed to the points of order, which don't need the second.
All right, then I move we enter executive session. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
No.
Aye.
No. I would.
Then you don't have the floor. Then I move we enter executive session. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Aye.
I'm opposed.
Whoa.
Then I move we enter executive session. Is there a
Oh my
second?
God. Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
I
Opposed?
would just like to hear what...
Then
I just wanna hear
you
from
don't
the
have the
people.
floor. There is a motion and I make a motion, pardon me, you don't have the floor, Councilwoman. I make a motion that we enter executive session. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed.
Opposed.
And I make a motion that we enter executive session at this time, because I will not allow this process.
Wow.
We are entering a budget process, concluding a budget process, a preliminary budget process, and I will not allow it to be captured or hijacked for political purposes. So thank you, Deputy, for arriving. Thank you, Deputy.
I would like to.
You do not have the floor, Councilwoman. The chair has the floor. I make a motion that we enter executive session. Is there a second?
I second that.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
No. I want discussion.
You don't have the floor,
But we have to
Councilwoman.
Have we seen enough? Yes.
Would this be a time for a point of order?
Good question.
The chair that's making the motion?
Yes, he's the chair, yeah.
And chairs make a motion?
No, and they also can't repeat the same motion again. That's also against the rules. You know what?
Yeah.
What do our experts say? I'll stop this here because it goes on for a while. What say ye? How do we?
In small meetings, the chair can make a motion, and there's no prohibition in a small meeting. That's appeared to be a small meeting.
Okay.
But you have to go through the procedures. You have to vote, and obviously he was getting voted down and not recognizing it and just keep going. So somebody should have said point of order, we've dealt with that, it's out of order, and go on with the business.
Okay. So you're correct. Point of order. Whether it would have been acknowledged or not, I guess, is a separate question. I don't think he would have probably acknowledged it, even if it was, a point of order. So in that case, it's the bullhorn technique.
So let's assume in this meeting that in their bylaws it says we will follow Robert's Rules of Order. Obviously, if their bylaws doesn't say that, then anything's possible. But if it does, that means all of Robert's Rules of Orders will be followed, correct?
No. Only the ones that aren't in conflict with the bylaws.
Okay, let's say there's nothing in the bylaws that conflicts.
Okay. In that case, then, yeah.
And then say Robert's Rules of Order. The chair cannot say, well, we're not going to follow that rule. We're going to just go on here.
You are
can't
correct.
really say that. Get point of order.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Okay, just a few final things. Oh, yes, question.
So what do you do if someone...
No, you're out of order. Moving on.
You need to be recognized.
Okay.
What do you do if someone is blatantly wrong and you're in that position when you're doing point of order and you're trying to get your point across, but this person is ignoring you and things are being passed? And, what's your right at that?
Been there, done that. I guess I don't necessarily have the definitive answer to that, but I can tell you what I've seen work in similar situations in the past is if you can get the assembly on your side and the chair is standing there alone, it's much easier to overcome those sorts of things. But I just want to mention one last thing. It's a favorite one that I've observed. I call it the roach coach maneuver. Okay? And this is one that I've experienced where you have a large meeting, okay, and there's a lunch truck outside. A chairman will, at strategic times, say, you're free to go out and get a bite to eat outside, and while a large number of people are outside, business is conducted, which might not have been, the best way of doing it. I've seen this happen, and my suggestion is just designate somebody to stay in the room while the meeting is not adjourned, right? Stay in the room, telephone your friends if they're outside, or just bring food so you can last through the entire meeting without having to leave. I will tell you that 2012, I was involved in the presidential convention in Arizona here. That meeting went 14 hours, okay, and people were leaving, and it was a strategy. The chair and the chairman had this strategy. They lost 3 votes, the first 3 votes to get send delegates to the national convention. They lost. The wrong candidate won. What they had done was delay and delay and delay until the quorum was lost. Then they declared, no quorum, adjourned, we'll do this by mail. And they appointed the delegates that they wanted to. So just a personal pet peeve of mine, bring food, don't be outlasted by those sorts of folks. Have a great day. Thanks so much for listening. Appreciate that.